Global markets awoke to a stunning headline. India, Russia's top new oil customer, had abruptly halted purchases. 6 massive oil tankers loaded with Russian so-called crude were left stranded at sea, cargo unwanted, destinations uncertain. The world watched as these steel giants circled off India and Sri Lanka, their crews in limbo, billions of dollars in assets frozen. The question, why did this seemingly perfect partnership collapse overnight? Beneath the surface, a fundamental disagreement over money and payment terms had shattered the alliance. The stranded tankers became a symbol of a failed negotiation and the fragility of global energy deals. Oil and gas are the backbone of Russia's economy, funding everything from its military to social programs. When sanctions hit after the Ukraine invasion, Russia's access to Western markets and crucial petrodollars was cut off. The Kremlin's survival depended on redirecting oil exports from Europe to Asia, making India and China indispensable. This pivot wasn't just strategy, it was economic survival. Russia's entire financial stability now hinged on finding new buyers for its oil. India and China became the only markets large enough to absorb the millions of barrels Europe no longer wanted. The stakes for Moscow couldn't have been higher. Western sanctions aimed to cripple Russia's energy sector, banning imports and capping oil prices. Russia responded by offering steep discounts on its crude, seeking buyers willing to navigate sanctions risks. India, prioritizing its own interests, refused to join the sanctions and seized the opportunity. Indian refiners bought discounted Russian oil, lowering import costs and taming inflation. In months, India became Russia's second-largest oil customer, reshaping global oil flows. This pragmatic partnership exposed the limits of Western sanctions in a multipolar world. Russia found a vital economic release valve. India gained a competitive edge. The new energy axis was born almost overnight. In just a single year, India's oil imports from Russia skyrocketed, leaping from less than 2% of its total oil imports to an astonishing 40%. This dramatic surge was triggered by global events and shifting alliances, as Western sanctions on Russia forced Moscow to seek new buyers for its crude. India, always hungry for affordable energy, seized the opportunity, negotiating deals that brought in millions of barrels at discounted prices. The country's ports, once relatively quiet, suddenly became the epicenter of a new oil rush. Ports like Sikka and Vadinar, located on India's western coast, transformed almost overnight. Russian-flagged tankers lined up at the docks, unloading vast quantities of crude oil. The ports buzzed with activity as workers raced to keep up with the relentless flow of shipments arriving from the far north. Inside the refineries, engineers and technicians worked around the clock, processing Russian Urals and so-called crude at record-breaking rates. The machinery hummed day and night, turning raw oil into valuable fuels and chemicals. This influx of cheap Russian oil allowed India to save billions of dollars on energy costs, strengthening its economy, and providing a crucial buffer against global price shocks. But India didn't just use this oil for itself. Refineries exported a significant portion of the refined products, diesel, gasoline, and more, even to Europe, which ironically was trying to cut ties with Russian energy. Indian ports became gateways, sending out shipments of refined fuels to markets all over the world. This arrangement rapidly turned India into a global refining powerhouse. By exploiting loopholes in international sanctions, Indian companies profited handsomely, cementing the country's status as a key player in the world oil market. The boom brought jobs, investment, and a sense of national pride. However, behind the scenes, the entire operation depended on a web of complex and often opaque payment systems. To bypass Western banking restrictions, Indian and Russian companies devised creative financial arrangements using alternative currencies, intermediaries, and shadowy networks. As trade volumes ballooned, the financial risks grew ever larger. Soon, the biggest challenge emerged: how to pay for all this oil without running afoul of international regulations. Executives and officials held tense meetings, searching for solutions as pressure mounted from all sides. The payment issue, simmering beneath the surface for months, threatened to unravel the entire operation. Every transaction became a potential flashpoint, with the risk of exposure or sanctions looming large. As uncertainty grew, oil tankers sat idle, storage tanks emptied, and workers grew anxious about the future. The once booming trade faced the real possibility of grinding to a halt. In the end, the so-called golden age of India's oil boom was built on shaky financial ground, an empire of energy and profit. always at risk of collapse from the hidden cracks beneath its foundation. Sanctions blocked Russia from the dollar system, forcing India and Russia to seek alternatives. India pushed for rupee-ruble payments, but Russia soon amassed billions in rupees it couldn't use or convert. The rupee's lack of global convertibility left Russia with store credit it didn't want. Frustration grew in Moscow. The payment system was now a financial drag. The dream of de-dollarization hit a harsh reality. Trade imbalances made the rupee unworkable. Russia needed a currency it could actually spend internationally. The failed payment system forced both sides back to the negotiating table. Russia's next proposal would prove even more problematic for India. Russia proposed settling oil trade in Chinese yuan, a currency it could use for imports from China. For India, paying in yuan, the currency of its main rival, was politically impossible. India and China's tense relationship made the idea a non-starter. National pride and security were at stake. India refused to authorize yuan payments, drawing a firm red line. Russia insisted, but India wouldn't budge even if it meant losing discounted oil. The impasse shattered the partnership, not over price, but over currency. The energy alliance crumbled as both sides refused to compromise. The deal was deadlocked by geopolitics, not economics. With Russian oil supplies disrupted, India swiftly pivoted back to its traditional Middle Eastern suppliers. Purchases from Saudi Arabia and Iraq surged. Existing infrastructure and relationships made the transition seamless. Saudi Arabia quickly reclaimed its spot as India's top oil supplier. India prioritized energy security over discounts, demonstrating agility and pragmatism. The move reminded Russia that India had other options and reaffirmed ties with Gulf partners. For Saudi Arabia, India's return was a strategic win. India's diverse supplier base proved its diplomatic flexibility and commitment to national interest. Russia suddenly found itself in a dire predicament. Its oil tankers stranded at sea, unable to dock or unload their precious cargo. The once busy shipping lanes were now dotted with idle vessels, each one a floating symbol of mounting costs and lost opportunity. As days turned into weeks, the financial burden grew heavier, with every passing hour adding to the expenses of keeping these massive ships operational and their crews supplied. The situation was especially grim for Russia's prized so-called crude. With no buyers willing to take the risk, barrels of oil sat untouched on docks and in storage, gathering dust instead of revenue. The world watched as Russia's oil, once in high demand, became an unwanted commodity. The financial pain was immediate and severe. Operational costs for the stranded tankers soared. Fuel, maintenance, and crew wages all had to be paid, even as the ship sat idle. On board, crews anxiously checked documents and fuel gauges, aware that every delay meant more uncertainty for their futures. Back on land, the impact rippled through Russia's oil industry. Refineries slowed or stopped production, shipping ports grew eerily quiet, and offices that once buzzed with activity now stood empty. Vital revenue streams were choked off, threatening the stability of entire companies. Russia's grand strategy to replace lost European markets with Asian buyers had hit an unexpected and impenetrable wall. Ports in Asia, wary of sanctions and payment issues, refused entry to Russian oil tankers, forcing many ships to turn back or wait endlessly at sea. In desperation, Rosneft, Russia's oil giant, slashed prices and offered deep discounts to attract new buyers, even reaching out to countries like Sri Lanka. But the stigma of sanctions and the risk of financial entanglements meant there were no takers. The oil remained unsold, and the losses mounted. The episode laid bare Russia's vulnerability. Once a dominant player, it now found itself a distressed seller with few options and even fewer allies. The world's headlines told the story of a nation struggling to adapt to a new and unforgiving reality. For the crews stranded at sea, the crisis was deeply personal. Isolated and uncertain, they faced long days and sleepless nights, cut off from their families and unsure when or if they would return home. The human cost of the standoff was impossible to ignore. Russia's inability to secure reliable payments left not just its oil, but its ships and people in limbo. Payment documents were stamped rejected, and barrels of oil sat unattended, a stark reminder of the risks of operating outside the global financial system. The sight of multiple tankers stranded together, their crews waving for help, became a powerful image of the crisis. Lifeboats sat ready, but there was nowhere to go. Everyone was waiting for a solution that seemed out of reach. In the end, the episode served as a harsh lesson for Russia and the world about the dangers and unpredictability of circumventing global finance. The crisis left scars that would not soon be forgotten. As Russia's desperation peaked, China stepped in to buy the stranded Sokol crude, paying in yuan. The tankers finally sailed for Chinese ports, ending the standoff. But China extracted a price. Russia had to accept yuan, advancing Beijing's goal of challenging the dollar. This move cemented China's leverage over Russia, making Moscow increasingly dependent on Beijing. The oil deal revealed the true hierarchy: Russia as junior partner, China as the dominant force. The yuan for oil system strengthened both nations' resilience to sanctions and challenged the US-led financial order. Russia solved its short-term problem, but deepened its long-term dependency. China emerged as the undisputed winner. The recent collapse of the India-Russia oil deal, followed by China's swift intervention, marks more than just a shift in trade agreements. It signals a pivotal turning point in the global landscape of energy and finance. For decades, the world has operated under a familiar system, where oil and energy resources flowed predominantly from east to west, and transactions were almost exclusively settled in US dollars. This system, often referred to as the petrodollar order, has underpinned American economic dominance and shaped international relations for generations. But now, that old order is fragmenting before our eyes. The traditional roots of energy trade are shifting, and the once unquestioned supremacy of the dollar is being openly challenged. As new alliances form and old ones falter, the very foundation of global finance is being rewritten. India and China, two of the world's fastest-growing economies, are no longer content to play by the established rules. They are asserting their own interests, setting new terms, and directly challenging the dominance of the United States and its Western allies. Their actions are not just about oil. They represent a broader push for autonomy and influence on the world stage. As more nations seek alternatives to the dollar, cracks are appearing in its long-standing supremacy. Countries are exploring new ways to settle trade, diversify reserves, and reduce their dependence on Western-controlled financial systems. The rise of yuan-based oil trade is a clear sign of this transformation. It signals the emergence of a parallel financial universe, one that operates increasingly outside the reach of Western oversight and control, and that could reshape the balance of power in global markets. India's refusal to pay for Russian oil in yuan was a bold assertion of its economic autonomy, even as Russia, facing Western sanctions, has grown more reliant on China's financial support. These moves highlight the complex and shifting alliances that are redefining the global order. The emerging axis between China and Russia now stands as a formidable challenge to the status quo. Their cooperation extends beyond energy, encompassing military, technological, and diplomatic spheres, and signals a new era of multipolar competition. In the end, the future of global power may well hinge on who controls the world's energy flows, and perhaps even more crucially, on what currency those vital resources are paid for. The world is watching as a new order takes shape, with profound implications for every nation on Earth.